Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. We've got a super interesting guest today and topic. We're on here with Denis Scott. And Denis, you're the CMO of UpChart, and I'm going to have you explain who UpChart is. But I'm also going to ask you in a minute here to explain a little bit of your career projection, or the trajectory that you've taken, because you've you said it earlier, you've never really replaced somebody. You actually had a new role. Like you were doing something different and unique all throughout your career. And that led so well to how you tackle that, how you think about this, because the subject today is how do we start selling new categories and new brands that haven't been sold before? So you're kind of the king of how do I do this when there hasn't been a this before?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've worked for a number of well-known companies and some startups throughout my career, companies like Lyft and OpenTable and The Gap. I'm now at CharterUP. And yeah, believe it or not, I've had probably 7 or 8 roles within my career that I didn't replace somebody. I was actually brought in and asked to build. And so I think that's something that I didn't start out early in my career thinking about, oh, that's what I'll be really good at. But here I am. I've had that experience now, and it's been a really fun journey to learn how, from a marketing lens, you can build a category or build an expansion of your product or go to new places and countries with your product, right? So yeah, very fortunate.
So I'd love to hear some of the stories about the new things that you've done, because there's direct correlation then to what you're doing at HubChart right now and the new category and brand you're building there.
Yeah, yeah. So, I'll give you a few examples that are sort of fun ones and maybe date myself a little bit. But in my time at the Gap, I started out in Old Navy, which was the biggest of the brands. We're working for really our marketing effectiveness and brand strategy group. And along the way, I got this novel idea to go down to our second floor where the digital division was, the online team, and I just got fascinated with what they were building and doing, and that led to me being one of the first quote unquote online marketers at the Gap. We didn't really have a name for it at the time, and that's where I started to learn what this SEO thing was. Um, I would go to meetups in San Francisco and, and learn from folks doing it because there wasn't a lot of people that knew how this all worked. And we ended up really moving the business on something like SEO in those early days, where most people in the building probably were not familiar with it. They are now, but at that time it was, hey, what is this content marketing and technical strategy behind how we're building our websites? And then it was like, why are the websites growing so fast? That's amazing. uh, but then I had other fun adventures. In my time at OpenTable, I was the first head of what the diner side of marketing is known as, and so really the demand side. And the reason they had never had that role, although they had already IPO'd and been around 15 years, were the challenge of the economics on that side of the business was really tricky. And so we had to figure out how we were going to build this and do this, right? And so I started as an IC. I made some pretty crazy models and some math requests from our CEOs, and they bought in, and we started to scale, and we saw that it was working, and it had a snowball effect to the point we got acquired by Booking Holding. And so now you're the largest part of the largest travel company in the world. And the task was, hey, go introduce your products to more European cities because that's where our customers are. The challenge then became, okay, well, when we went to Germany, we were told by the restaurant owners, and rightfully so, I don't do reservations and I have plenty of diners. And so we had to go back and think about what our playbook really was and the value we added. And what we realized was, well, you're right, but what would be really expensive for you to do is to market and get diners from the US here or diners from the UK. And we have millions of those and they're on our platform. So when they come to Germany, that's going to be incremental business for you. And that really became our playbook as we went city by city in Europe. introducing who we were, introducing it, sometimes even the idea of reservations, and then saying, we will also introduce you to millions of diners around the world that would be really expensive for you to market to.
I love it. And there's an element in there. You said I started as an IC, and you had to start with a financial model, right? Where,
Yeah.
one of your premises is that you need to go beyond marketing and you need to be a business leader, and you
Yeah.
need to take that mentality and thinking into what you do. So maybe tell us a little bit more about what you mean by being a business leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of, in my role now at CharterUp, I'm really the first CMO we've ever had. We've expanded our sales team quite a bit. We were one of the fastest growing companies in the United States, private companies. But this is still an evolving and building category, right? And as a CMO, you have to come in and understand, one, what do growth trends look like, and what do we, desire them to look like? How are we going to go about doing that? And how do I take the other business leaders like a CFO or your CEO or your board on the journey of why you're going to invest in the way you're going to invest, why this category has uniqueness that you understand, um, how you're going to not only introduce a product and your brand, but actually introduce a category, that this is a different way of booking group transportation, right? And so if you think about Lyft and Uber in the early days, I grew up in San Francisco, I started to see these pink mustaches around, and how does this work? And it was interesting that they had to not only introduce who they were as a brand, but introduce, this is a different way of commuting and traveling, this rideshare notion, right? And that's exactly what we're doing at CharterUp. Is this is a better way of, both on the demand side and the supply side, driving this connectivity of our customers together and our suppliers together in a digital and tracked and enhanced way that everyone wins, because it's a better solution.
And I know that people are thinking here this is a B2B podcast, and you've given a lot of B2C
Yeah,
examples. In CharterUP, you're like a limousine, a bus service. Is how would you explain it? Where you're expanding quite dramatically within the B2B space.
that's right. It feels like a business. So essentially, what the product are, it's a digital way. So similar to OpenTable, we replaced phone calls, and so our product is replacing phone calls in many ways, right? That booking a charter bus can be tricky because you have a lot of mom and pop shops. Many people have experienced that around a wedding, right? I need to find a bus for my guests, and I've had to call 5 companies, and they don't have availability. They're sold out, or that's the wrong size vehicle. We've brought all of that online. It's all digital now. We're the largest supplier of buses in the country, yet we don't own a bus, right? So we've built this and brought this together in a way that connects those customers and those suppliers. The interesting thing is, I think all of us can go to that wedding moment and go, "Oh yeah, that's right." But the scale is really coming from the enterprise side of our business. And so a few examples there are, think about a K through 12 school. They're booking field trips, they're booking sports activities, they're booking, the band is going to the game. Sometimes they even book parents to come along to the game, right? There's this kind of ongoing demand for group transportation that a K through 12 school needs. And so we've built that technology out, that it's all in one stop shop, versus somebody having within that organization, call every time they need a bus to 5 different companies, right? The other places that we are expanding our enterprise customers, we're doing more and more, and I'm sure many of us have seen them in the different cities in the US. There's more and more people going back to work. And so these are means of getting workers back to the office and allowing them to work on a nice elevated experience bus on their way there. So that's commuter shuttles is a big part of our business. And then the last one I'll just call out on the enterprise side is, industries like construction, where you have 50 employees or 70 employees that for 2 years need to get from a parking lot, which is not the construction site, to the construction site, which is where they're probably building the parking, but it's not ready yet, right? And so these are these longer term enterprise deals that are very involved because you're dealing with lots of elements of cities and all of those pieces that go into having buses running on these routes. Um, yeah, so we are really scaling our enterprise motions right now.
So here's my first question for you. It is obviously completely understand the challenge, the need, right? Lots of times, your customers, they understand the challenge too, but sometimes we've just lived with something for so long, we
Right.
don't really recognize it as a challenge. It's just kind of the way that it is, right? So are you having to redefine the challenge? Is that a part of expanding into a new category? Is finding a different way to say, hey, it doesn't have to be like this? Like, how do you
Right.
think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you're right, which is, hey, the charter bus industry has existed for decades, and we've operated with it in the model that it was.
Yeah.
So the interesting part is many of our conversations and particularly in the enterprise side where we do a lot more of an account-based marketing strategy, going after target customers and ideal customer profiles. I'll use an athletic director, for example, right? This is part of either their role or their organization. And a lot of the conversation that we have, maybe it's an email they saw from us, or maybe, we were at an event that they were at, or, they've seen something online about us. A lot of the questions are around like, how does it really, it's that easy? You can do it like that? There's almost I'm so used to it the other way. I don't fully believe you that it all works just like that. Right. And so, I think that's part of introducing that category notion is there's a better way to do it that hasn't necessarily existed, right? And if I go back to the open table days, for a lot of us on the diner side, same challenge was I used to have to call restaurants and then, oh, they only have 6 o'clock versus 8 o'clock, or that back and forth notion. And quite honestly, it was costly for restaurants to field all those calls because guess when we call restaurants is when we're after work and they're their busiest, and it wasn't a great consumer experience, right? And so you brought businesses together who had this, hey, this is a pain for us to manage. You've built a software platform that solves a lot of those, makes it all digital, and now you've told diners it's really easy. You can go and do this anytime you want. And so in many ways, that's how we're creating the category with CharterUp of there's a better way for this group transportation to work. And given our supply reach, for events, no no job is too small. We can figure it out. Right.
So, the typical mindset is, oh, wow, I don't want to have to take on that effort to educate an industry, right?
Yeah.
And then just to do that, do it successful and open the doors up for competition. So what do you think about that? Right. And is it an opportunity to educate, but at the same time to brand the category in a way? Like, how do you, because you are having to educate,
Right.
what's the ROI on that in your mind?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think it's why um, the interview process is always important, and learning more about businesses and how it operates and what their challenges are and what the head of product is thinking and how the CFO reads the business. Again, it's kind of back to that business mindset. And what I found so exciting about CharterUp, and maybe some of your listeners are having this moment, is as I explained it and how this works, I get a lot of, oh, why didn't I think of that? Right.
Yeah.
And that's a really positive reaction that's energizing because you're onto something. But to your point, now the challenge is, okay, without breaking the bank and losing confidence of my leadership team, how are we going to start to build this momentum and snowball and help our sales team out from a marketing perspective, right? And help drive incremental growth year over year. So I find that when you have a problem statement like that, it's the most energizing to me, right? And I think that's a lot of why I found myself taking on roles where it isn't somebody left and can you pick up and carry on what they were doing. It's, hey, we don't know how to do this exactly in this in your function. We need somebody that's going to come in and build confidence and help us build this thing out. And to me, that's really exciting, right? Um, yeah,
So one of the things that, I've been very fortunate in this podcast to talk to over 100 C-suite executives in B2B organizations. And one of the through lines that kind of runs through the vast majority of the conversations that I'm having with them is, this includes CROs and CEOs and CMOs, is their go-to-market strategy is based on understanding their customer, their ICP, better than anyone else. And
yeah,
so when I'm hearing you talk, you have to define, you have to understand a category, let alone, the ICP within it. The definition of the ICP, the scope creep of the ICP, right?
mm,
That's happening is something that silos a lot of organizations. And
right.
so as you're starting a category, how do you start thinking about, okay, who is my ICP, right? We're defining this category to begin with. You've talked about construction, you've talked about, higher education, you've talked education field trips. And
Right.
um, so how do you handle like actually defining your ICP in this kind of new category?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I've seen that scope creep happen, and you have teams that can get built up dedicated to a whole ICP that you realize, wait, marketing's not even supporting that. Like I
Right.
didn't know that was we have a team against that. So no, I think it's really important. I think there's two things that jump out at me. One is our founder Armir is from the category. He has spent over 20 years in the group transportation space, even to the point he drove vehicles, right? He really understands it. And so in some ways, there's demand for this. You're teaching them to do it a different way, to engage in this category in a different way. But the good news is the category has people that are already in need of the product, right?
Right.
The second thing that you mentioned that I think is really, really important is that can shift over time. And in doing that, I think you have to stay extremely close to sales teams. Sometimes it's because sales is now they've got connections to a certain category and it's like we can do well here. Or sometimes it's, hey, we keep trying to sell here and it's not working because there's some element of the product that doesn't fit the needs of the customer, right? And so I think as marketers, I always say there's two things I like to say in who I look for in hiring, and I hold myself to this is to be accountable about results and adaptable. That whatever you set out doing in your OKRs, there's going to be other things that come up. There's going to be shifts in the business, and you have to be marketing is one of the teams that can react the fastest in any organization, right? You're not going to go have everybody in engineering and product stop and build something out in the next week and a half sprint. Like that typically doesn't work that way because these really important ideas generally are relatively complex, right? And so it's like, hey, marketing, what can we do? And what I like to do as you establish that ICP, and we talked about a few examples here, I like to put on that product marketing lens, right? Well, how is this better? What are the features or how does this function differently that I'm really going to react and care about that, right? And so just to use a few of our examples, a, a K through 12 school and an athletic department, they're going to want to know that the kids are safely on the bus, that the bus is, you know, tracked and that parents can get notified and trips can get shared. All of that is possible in the product, but that's where a lot of that conversation goes to with that type of ICP. Um, if you're talking about a work commute shuttle, they want to know that my employees can have Wi-Fi on their way to work because they want to use that time to work because they don't have to drive, right? They want to know the buses are on time because people have meetings and they need to get there by a certain time, right? Or get home even, right? And so, you talk a lot about bus tracking there as well. And so you start to find this connectivity of what you've built with how it helps these folks. And what's interesting is that's where you start to gain a lot of momentum because they also give you insights, whether it's product insights or things that are important to them, and it helps you with that next sale, right? And so I think then you start to see it snowball a bit, right? Um,
I love how you're taking, because I'm getting making some spitballs and throwing them right at you. Right? Like, well, hey, this is the typical issue. Here's another, right? So in the world of especially B2B enterprise sales,
yeah,
you typically don't go in with a product marketing approach, right?
right,
Because in the world of a B2B buyer, and this trend of the self-buying journey where they do their research, they don't want to talk to the companies till the very end, and they've got their consideration list set. And so the goal for the majority of the B2B world is, how do I get earlier in that
yeah,
conversation? And I'm not
yeah,
going to do it by talking product feature benefit, which has proven not to be a long-term sustainable, competitive advantage anyway. So it's through thought leadership, right? It's through
right,
being a trusted advisor. It's being that expert, the salesperson that is the consultant, and the marketing and the content machine that supports that. Not only has to have a keen understanding of the buyer themselves, but it's got to support that kind of a ABM effort where you can't just keep selling, selling, selling. You got to
right.
be able to add value and add value. How
I
does that play into what you're doing?
I love that, and I have an interesting example. I could not agree more. So, in my time, I was at SurveyMonkey, running marketing there, and we had a really interesting journey because SurveyMonkey is at the time, a 20-plus-year-old beloved brand that everybody knows. Um, it's not necessarily fully enterprise considered, if you will, right? There was other players in the category like a Qualtrics that sort of had cornered that enterprise market more. But that was where we were pushing to go, was that the self-serve model that we were known for and sort of beloved for, there was so much we could build on top of that that was incremental value for the customers in this enterprise ready software, right? And we went about it with kind of an account-based marketing approach at first, and we had our target customers that we wanted, and we were trying to set up meetings with them and, get our foot in the door. And what we realized was when we looked at our base of customers from who was using the self-serve product, and I know from my team at Lyft, we had 3 different groups using SurveyMonkey that were all disconnected on individual accounts. We started to realize these are not people that are trying to ask their friends what time the barbecue in the backyard should be. These are Fortune 500 companies sitting in our self-serve portal that are using our product today that were probably great to talk to about an expanded relationship. And maybe it's not the right contact, but the company is already using us, right? And so we created a team called Mine the Base. We literally had blow up mining picks for ourselves. And we started to find ways of trying to drive that value conversation, like you said, as our intro versus sort of the cold call. I know you work with somebody else. And what we found was, one, they were willing to take the call on a much more frequent basis. Two, they're already seeing value in our product. So we have a relationship, right? And so we are not trying to sell them on, hey, you should use a product. They're already using it. What we would talk about was, hey, there's incremental elements of, you know, if you're on an enterprise account, that data stays with you, right? Whereas if you are on an individual account, it's tied to their email address, right? There's no way for the company to get that data back. And that's really the only way we could do that. There's data security elements in that, right?
Right.
All of those things, single sign-on became, a big one for us. We have a market research product. We have a CX product. You can connect all of this in the back end, right? So you can have throughout your organization. And the other element was you don't have to rip this all out. We can build on top of it, right?
Mhm.
And so it was again an education process that all started from this idea of you know who we are, you've worked with us, and you're already seeing value. There's more value to be had if this is, needs for you. And that turned into our competitive advantage was we had already built this relationship, right?
Right. Now, does that hold true at CharterUp? Because as a newer company, you don't have the installed base that like a Survey Monkey has.
Right. And so it's funny, we sent an email this week to some of our customers that we've seen 5 times or more, to talk to them about our enterprise offering and how that's different and how they
Mm.
could benefit from that. And we have seen some of that like mind the base type motion where we're seeing customers that had a really good experience come back to us. And that's where we can start to say, are you a part of this organization? Are there other folks you want to add into this account? Well, the data can be stored in one place. We'll keep all your trip history, all of those elements. And so again, that gets back to where we were earlier, where you're kind of introducing the category as well, that there's other things that come with this enterprise account, right? And if you're going to be booking with us, right, that we can be an even greater partner to you and give you more, right? So we're in the early stages of that, but I'll let you know in a few weeks how that motion is
That
going, but
sounds good.
we're off and running. Yeah, yeah,
So I imagine though that right, that can't be the only enterprise strategy, right? That you've got to be able to go out and introduce yourself to new accounts that don't know who you are, that have huge potential, right? So and where you're defining the category, right? And
right,
defining the problem. And so I'm wondering what your words of wisdom are for countless other organizations that maybe aren't defining a brand new category, but we all have a job of redefining the problem.
right.
Most often we're talking to people that have been living with the problem. And you
Yes,
run into the issue of, in a limited amount of time and the sea of problems that I have that I, I just have to deal with, right? How am I raising this up to a level where now I need to stop and I need to think and I need to reevaluate what I'm doing here. You got to raise the priority, right?
right,
Because the people that you're talking to, right, like athletic director, right, scheduling transportation may be this much of their job, right?
right.
They're an athletic director, right? So you're trying to redefine the scope of a problem to rise it up, as that is an example, to somebody so they say, okay, you're right. I really do have to act on this. Right. So
Yep, yep.
how do you think about that?
No, you're spot on. You're right. So if I think about the athletic director persona, you're right. It's a small portion of their time, and to make that a trusted partner that makes it an even smaller portion of their time, that's I think where you get the positive reaction of like, wait, I
Uh,
do not have to do this the way I've been doing it, right?
right.
Which is really powerful. The one that comes to mind, though, that's interesting is we have built relationships with a number of organizations around emergency management.
Mm,
And if you think about the complexity of what those organizations deal with, first of all, by nature, many of these events are unpredictable, right? I mean, we have some warning of hurricanes coming, but things happen, right?
right.
Um, but the number of moving pieces that can happen or have to be managed is really challenging. And one of those things that is a real challenge for them and a real pain is if I have to evacuate an area, how am I going to do this fast? How do I pull this off, right? And so we've been attending conferences and meeting more of these leaders within these emergency management groups, and building those relationships because, in many ways, you hope they never need to call you, but if they do, you're well equipped to get whatever they need there. And again, that's the beauty of, as we continue to build out our supply, we can get more vehicles there than other folks can in a short window, right? And so one example I have of that was the unfortunate hurricane and power impact in Houston
Mm.
more recently, and we were able to help those teams out, and we got 150 buses there in less than 48 hours. And so, that takes a lot of coordination and management, and we had, like everybody else that was working on that, and trying to remedy, we had a lot of people not sleeping, working around the clock, managing all of those pieces. But, that's for an organization that's trying to do that, transportation, getting 150 buses there would have been a really hard challenge, right? And it definitely wouldn't have happened in 48 hours. So, that's also a credit to all of our supply partners. They all jump in and they're willing to get their vehicles there too, right? Which
What a
is great.
phenomenal story.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It's
mean, I'm trying to think, of everything that we've talked about here. If there was one thing on the go-to-market strategy inside of a new category, what would you want folks to take away from our conversation here?
yeah, that's really interesting. I think this is a kind of a funny answer. I think it's this notion of, you want to build a playbook, but don't go in with a playbook, right? Like, you have things work, right? Or you've done it before. So that could be your playbook, is like, hey, I have the confidence that I've figured this out before, and here was the problem statement. But what I have found is, in any business, in those, call it, first 3 to 6 months, you're gonna have those head scratching moments like, I never thought about that, right? I never thought about, in the bus industry, we're willing to accept at times that the airplane is delayed an hour.
Yep.
But in the bus industry, if you have people standing, waiting, looking for a bus, it has to be on time, right? And so it's small pieces like that that you start to build around, right? And so in your marketing, you talk about how frequently you're on time, which is you know extremely, extremely high, right? There are a tire can pop or something, right? But those are the things where I start to learn about the business, and then say, okay, well, I've marketed to all types of customers before with different types of products, and here's what I am starting to build as our playbook here to really grow this, right? And I am soaking in as much as I can from all the other teams and folks who have been here longer than me. And then you find someday, at some point along the way, somebody, whether it's a peer or a friend, is like, wow, you're really an expert on surveys, right? Or, hey, you really know this bus industry, right? And so that's kind of the moment of, now you're actually associating me and connecting me to a category I probably was trying to introduce you to, of what this company does, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, just that notion of being open-minded about, you're going to hit things you've never hit before.
I love it. And I know people are going to have questions that I didn't ask. I tried to ask every hard one that I could think of.
You
But
did
if
great.
would it be appropriate if we gave out maybe your profile or your LinkedIn profile on
Yeah.
LinkedIn? If I had questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to connect with people. That'd be great.
All right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for coming on and just kind of giving us new ideas and ways to think about it, right down to don't start with the tried and true playbook. But that's our comfort zone, right?
That's right. That's why it's hard to say. Yeah.
So thank you for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. This is great. Appreciate it.